Welcome to the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show, a broadcast service of globalbusinessnews.net.
This episode from the meeting room of Global TV Talk Show is brought to you by
The Bridge School, the accredited international online private school of choice, at bridgek12.org.
Porch Light Rental and Destination Services. Reduce your renter lump sum or managed relocation costs. Visit them at porchlightrental.com.
CubeMonk, featuring the world's first smart cube. Track your goods with our advanced GPS system. Welcome to the future of moving and relocation at cubemonk.com.
Primestone Partners, featuring corporate, government, and developer housing solutions, as well as senior-level advisory services. Find them at primestonepartners.com.
And by heirs.com. With our full range of services, we can help design and manage your international relocation. Find us at heirs.com.
Insured Nomads provides protection and peace of mind, with health insurance, travel insurance, group, or tailored insurance for the globally mobile. Visit us at insurednomads.com.
And by International Auto Source. We are the vehicle experts for expats, featuring all major brands of automobiles with flexible solutions and financing. On the web at intlauto.com.
This is Ed in San Diego, and this is Global TV Talk Show. And with us is Chase Eskelson, alive and well in just north of Dallas, and Julie Taylor, very much alive in LA Metro, and Mary Gifford in Arizona. So welcome to the show. Mary, what do you do?
Good morning. Thank you. I am the president of StrongMind, which is a company that provides education solutions to public, private, and public charter schools across the country and more recently across the world. And it's been a lot of fun. We not just provide content and platform, we also provide solutions, instructional models, teachers, can manage schools. We can really do the entire continuum of running schools to just providing content. And it's been fun. The last year has been great fun to figure out how to provide good solutions to people during the pandemic. And so I think we're going to do more great things. I think it will become hopefully a little bit less feeling like emergency remote learning and a lot more deliberate, but it's been a great ride the last year or so.
So what do you recommend in terms of strong minds and teaching kids, or teaching everybody? What do you recommend to people who, like Chase in Texas, that have to deal with that bad time?
I recommend, and Julie might recall this from, Chase and Julie and I have worked together on and off for, nearly 2 decades since the beginning of online learning. And one of the things that we learned early on, and partly living in a state like Arizona, where 20 years ago, big parts of the state had very limited connectivity. And some parts of the state, they're off the power grid as well. And so we would always talk about what you should be prepared to do offline if you lose connection, if you lose power, and to have some of those things ready at all times. There's still a whole lot of utility in, traditional books, in, your note cards that you make with vocabulary of your history words. So those kinds of things to make sure that you actually do have a little toolkit over here should you lose connectivity or power and not be able to access what you would normally access online.
Good. Thank you.
Ed, one of the things that has made our strategic partnership, our being Verano's strategic partnership with StrongMind, so unique and work so well is, and we've talked about it a couple times on your show, but it's an intentionally designed product, right? They've put time and effort and thought into building out this digital infrastructure, this foundation to start from, and it's so vastly different. Exactly what Mary just described. There's things that need to happen offline and that can happen offline. And then I contrast that with my kids, with the pandemic and the snow and everything. My kids are remote right now, and they just canceled school for this entire week. And I thought, well, that's weird. Why are we canceling school? Okay, there might be an hour here and there when we don't have internet. But why aren't they reading a book? Why aren't they getting their fingers dirty in a science project? There's a lot of things that we could be doing, but because my student's local school doesn't have that infrastructure in place and it was kind of thrown together last minute, it's vastly different from what the Verano schools are able to offer by utilizing some of the StrongMind platform and product and the services around it.
Well, and I think too, like, I think my experience this year with my own children in the local schools is a lot of it has to do with policy and attendance policy and what they're able to count as attendance hours. So with our local schools, they made the decision that the students had to be on Zoom for 5 hours a day to account that as attendance hours. And I think that is really an important discussion too, is what are some of the policies around education at the state level, at the federal level, internationally, that we can really help students succeed beyond, some of these legalistic loopholes that we're having to meet requirements.
That is interesting. I follow legislation in many states, and I think, Julie, to that point, that is one of the things we're seeing this spring in legislative sessions domestically is what needs to happen to create the flexibility needed to serve kids when things don't go as planned. And it still is not as deliberate as what Chase described. I think that they still need to get a whole lot more deliberate in planning for this and not just thinking, well, like, what do we do if things don't go right? But at least they are now contemplating that they need to think about, mastery-based. I just read a bill the other day that would really allow for mastery-based progression for a student and funding based on mastery. If what we really care about is, did kids master content, and we don't necessarily care what mode they were using when they mastered it, we should figure out how to allow kids to progress and how to fund the school for mastery. And so I think some of those things are being discussed, and there's some proposed legislation around some of it. I still think it is a little bit more to address what was happening haphazardly rather than building in some fundamental planning behind it. But hey, it's going to shake things up, and I'll take a little shaking. I mean, I think it's time to shake things up. And so looking at things differently, even if it took a pandemic to do it and they're not looking at it fully like they should, I'll take a little bit of looking at it differently right now.
What about a tax write-off or some kind of benefit to allow parents to buy or make it easier for them to buy in another laptop and faster speed?
So there are about 25 states right now that have legislation pending that would find a way to fund a student rather than funding a system. And they look a little different from state to state and what would be permissible. But the aim of it really is to say, like, as a parent, here's what I need to make sure my child is getting educated. It may be that I need another device. It may be that I need Wi-Fi. It may be that I want to buy some online courses to supplement what my student's getting over here. But to really allow the funding to go to the student and the parent to make the choice of how to spend that taxpayer money on education rather than giving it to an institution that's going to try to do it the same way for all kids. And so there are several states debating this literally right now.
Chase?
There's so many different things we could talk about in this instance, but I think that it's vitally important that we understand the benefit here from a parent perspective and the wealth of opportunities that would arise from funding students versus funding institutions. It will open up so many doors that will help students academically from a social emotional aspect. It will open up numerous doors that we don't even have in existence right now. And I just am so happy to see so many people taking that up. Mary, one other thing that you mentioned, and maybe you can dig in a little bit deeper, a lot of the folks who are watching Ed's show are not education wonks like the three of us. Can you explain in a little bit more detail what mastery-based learning is and why that's important from a parent perspective as they're looking, there's a lot of folks watching here who are looking for schools around the world for their kids.
I think maybe the best way to illustrate what the potential of mastery-based learning is to talk about what it isn't. So if I'm a little kiddo in a traditional school, it may be that at the end of my science class, the bell goes off at 52 minutes into the class, and I am not yet done with my science. But I close that book and I go on to math. And somewhere down the line, I've got to figure out how to master what I didn't master in 52 minutes of my science class. It could be that I go on to my math class and I master my math concepts 36 minutes into my class. And I really have very little to do for the balance of that time. And so that is what we typically do with kids, is we expect everyone to move at a similar pace, and that we actually have very firm boundaries around what a kiddo does on a content basis throughout the day. As a parent, I think you can customize that. Teachers, I think, have a sincere desire to customize it, but they have 30 kids in their classroom and they can't do it. As a parent, I could actually say, I know that Mary needs a little bit more time in science and a little less time in math. And so I'm going to plan my day so that Mary has time to master all of that content in science. I know I can flex a little bit of math time over here. And I know that, we're going to have serious things coming up in English language arts kind of stuff. And I need to block some time that would be maybe a half a day to do that instead of, 52 minutes over 3 days, because I want some concentrated time on English language arts. And you're truly focusing on the student learning the content and moving on, and not having to just spend time on it because everyone else is spending time on it, or not shortchanging the student time when they really need more time to master content. So it's really actually letting the kid move at an appropriate pace and master the content. And it's empowering. It gives kids a lot of ownership of what they're doing. And, I think right now there is so little interaction between parents and teachers because of the pandemic. We have friends who literally, they have never met the teacher who is teaching their second grade child. And they can't go in the school building and interact. They can't observe what their kiddo is doing in the classroom with the teacher. And that teacher has 30 kids in that same situation. It's really impossible for teachers to even flex a little right now because of the pandemic. It's so much better, I think, if we could allow parents to direct some of this, teachers to direct as much as they can. Everyone is not going to learn at home. Some are going to be in our classrooms. And we need to figure out how to think about mastery-based learning in the classroom as well.
Julie, in 52 minutes, when I was a kid, I couldn't retain anything. How do they retain anything? I mean, with learning, listening, I guess. Yeah. But how do they self-actualize it?
So what's important is repetition. Ed, I think that the more practice that we get, even as adults, the more practice that we get, the more it sinks in, and it's into that long-term memory. We hear and we see from studies that it takes about 7 times before hearing something and practicing something before it goes into the long-term memory. So it's not something that just happens overnight, and we need to keep going and building on those foundational level pieces. And that's why it's really important, like Mary's talking about the mastery-based learning, that our students that are able to get the time that they need to master foundation level objectives and standards before they move on to the next course or grade level. That is especially true in math. The math foundations build upon each other year after year. And if we're just pushing students through to the next grade level before they've had the opportunity to master it, it's really detrimental to their learning, because now they're expected to learn, different algebraic equations, and they don't understand what a variable is. So, we really just need to be able to allow students to move at their own pace so that they can master those foundational skills.
Because I would think that without retention techniques that's tailor-made, I know tailor-made, Julie, then it's a guaranteed 250 on the SAT if they still give that. I don't know. I know I experienced that.
Well, and I think there's a second piece to this as well, in that we can't treat every single student the same way. And I know that makes some people prickle and they think, oh, you gotta have equity. Hold on, let me explain what I mean. Students learn differently. I learn so much different than my wife learns. And it's kind of a running joke between us, because I can sit and listen to someone for 2-3 hours and walk away and explain the concepts and whatnot. And my wife's like, no, I got to get in. I got to touch something. I got to feel it. I got to understand it. I got to play with it for a little while to really comprehend the exact same concept. And so when you look at schools and they're treating 30 kids in one classroom all the exact same way, some of those kids are going to learn and they're going to be successful in that concept. And others just flat out aren't, because that's not the way that they learn easiest, the best way for them to retain that knowledge. And so it's really important that we understand that first, and that we implement different methods of teaching those students. For instance, our Arizona campus, Valor Academy, we have a station rotation model. And so the students are moving into different groups and different tables, and they learn the same concept in a different way, a different method of learning. And so at one table, they are going to put hands on objects and learn about that. And the next, they're going to be writing, and they're going to be working on that memorization piece and understanding this concept from that format. And then another, they're going to be talking with each other and learning from an auditory perspective. And so understanding that it's a school and a teacher's responsibility to understand the different methods and then incorporate those into the classroom for effective learning. There's so many different pieces we could get into. We could talk all day about this, but it's so much more than just 30 kids in a classroom listening to a teacher talk for 52 minutes.
Jason and I have talked about before how the COVID pandemic has really forced the world, the entire world, to look at distance learning in a new light, or education in general in a new light, and has opened up opportunities for discussion on what digital learning curriculum can look like. Mary, what are some of the trends that you've seen in legislation and education just that are coming up in this legislative season that could potentially change what education looks like in the US and maybe around the globe?
I think that there is a ton of frustration in how most traditional schools have responded to this. And I think that's fueling some of the efforts in different states to fund students instead of the institutions. I don't know that that's going to end up being a law we see in 25 states, but it's being debated. But I think part of that is fueled by frustration that parents did not like how this rolled out. Their kids were not well served. The parents felt out of the loop. Their kids were bored. My kid, they expected my kid to literally do something. Julie said 5 hours a day. I hear typically 2 hours a day. All my kid was doing was something 2 hours a day. So I think that we're going to see a lot more parent empowerment as a result of things not going well. I think we are going to see some attention being paid to finding out how things can go well in an online setting, replicating things, identifying best practices. I think there will be some discussion around funding differently. Even online schools that have been around for years are funded differently from state to state to state. And so I think there's an examination right now of how should we be appropriately funding this? Does the funding structure look different in online than it does in person? It's more complicated than saying we don't have yellow buses in online instruction. It's much more complicated than that. And so I think there's some attention to that. I think there's a recognition now amongst traditional educators that online learning is harder than they thought. I think for a couple of decades, traditional educators have thought, yeah, that online learning stuff is pretty easy, and kids can do whatever they want. It's not very engaging. And now they're saying, like, you know what? It's hard to engage kids online. It's hard to teach them. It's hard to hold them accountable. Administrators, principals are saying it's hard to hold teachers accountable for what they're doing with kids online. So I think accountability structures are starting to be examined to figure out, like, how do we hold kids and teachers accountable? How do we engage kids? Engagement matters, period, end of story. I jokingly talked about, the Algebra 1 class where the kid sleeps in the back of the class most of the day. At least the teacher can walk around and see the kid sleeping and poke him once in a while and wake him up, and he'll maybe get something out of the class. in an online setting, like, I don't know that he's sleeping. I don't know that he's in the basement playing video games. So what do you do to actually look at engagement strategically, and how do you determine whether it's happening and hold accountable? I've seen some cool things in only a couple of places, and this is what I hope to see more of, is it's not just learning that has shifted to the home setting in the pandemic. Work has shifted to the home setting. And office buildings, factories are empty, and people are working from their homes. And collaborating and working together from home is different than doing it in an office building. And so there are some places where I've seen actually now employers working with post-secondary institutions and high schools and saying, like, here's what we need to be thinking about doing online to foster kids learning around how they work together, how they collaborate, and how they develop those professional skills that they're going to need. Work may look different forever. It may never go back to how it looked last January. And so what are we doing to make sure kids are coming out of high school and the post-secondary setting with those different sets of skills that will be needed for how work goes? And so that, to me, is something really cool that people are starting to talk about and kind of connect the dots. It's not just about learning from home. Everyone's working from home. And so the universe may have forever changed. And this is a time when, God willing, education is going to like keep up with it and not be a couple decades behind catching up. So it could be really exciting.
Fascinating.
Something that's really neat is that the Bridge School partners with various organizations to provide learning for their students. For example, we partner with a major ballet company, and we are able to enroll several of their students into our school. So now not only is the student able to participate in a school and have a seamless transition while they're very active in their ballet career, but now they have other dancers that are with them that are doing some of the same courses. So it's almost becoming a camaraderie where they're taking similar courses, they're working together on their ballet, and really being able to form this great partnership with these organizations to provide a needed service. A lot of times there are student athletes who will spend hours and hours at the gym or at the basketball courts, wherever it is. And if they're attending a traditional school, they're in school from 8 to 3. They get a quick snack, and then they're at the gym for 3 to 4 hours in the evening. Coming to us and having that partnership, they're able to break that up throughout the day. They can have a morning practice, get some schooling in, have an afternoon practice, finish their schooling in the evening. So there's that flexibility. And additionally, if there are tournaments or performances, it's fantastic because if there's a week where they have shows straight through, they can take that week off of learning and then pick back up when they're done. So it offers this great flexibility. And for the program owners of these sports leagues, it is a win-win situation for them because they see this need. They see this need that their students need to make sure that they are obtaining the grades necessary to be successful adults in our country and in other countries. But it provides them an environment where they can be successful at both.
So, Julie, what do you do during intersession? In other words, spring break?
Well, we can do lots of things. So here's the thing about our program specifically is that we have a lot of students who want to advance in their credits. They want to graduate early and they want to work through the summer. And so we do have a spring break built into our calendar for those students that want to get ahead. Or for all students, but we can allow those students who want to work ahead that ability. So during spring break, we are going to have many students who are still logging in, who are trying to finish their work a little bit early, and they're trying to get through their high school career maybe when they're 17. And that's really an exciting thing. I also know that I'm going to have students who are a little bit further behind. And I know we've mentioned this before, but I personally have a handful of students who are struggling right now with the mental health aspect of being isolated and all that goes along with that, and working from home and not seeing the friends and not having the social life. So we have a handful of students that are really struggling right now, and they might need a little bit of extra time and care to finish their content. So they might be using spring break as a way to catch up with their work. But for those students, we don't want to put added pressure on them, and we want to make sure that we're giving them tools and resources to meet their whole student needs, not just chemistry, but what are the needs of the whole student.
So what about phys ed? Chase, do they get the kids outside to shovel?
I wish I could have got my kids outside to shovel. They're still a little bit too small. I'll tell you what, I'm sure sore today though. But yeah, it kind of goes along with what Mary's saying. A lot of this stuff has to be rethought. Like, how do we do a PE class in a digital format during COVID, or the great Texas deep freeze of 2021, or how do we do it on site at a hybrid location? And I think there's a lot of different options here. And Julie and I were talking about this. I don't know, Julie, was that yesterday or the day before, about infusing your education with different sports. For instance, the Bridge School has a partnership with a major ballet company here in the United States. They've partnered with an Irish basketball team and others. And so these students many of them are getting much more physical education from these sport activities. And so that's a big part of their education. But then we also have a PE course, and I'll let Julie talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are ways that you can incorporate PE and health into an online format. So it's not just about, going and running laps around the football field like you might think about in a typical PE class. It is about the health of your body, and it can be more about the anatomy and how your muscles interact and how you eat fuels your body. So there are modules that contain more than just the physical activity. And then students do keep logs of the physical activity that they're doing as well. So it can incorporate both the online portion that includes actual learning about the body and the benefits of physical education, as well as, what you are doing.
Okay.
And that's honestly something that our founder is very passionate about, is just the health ed side, from putting the right foods or fuel into your body, understanding how that affects all this stuff. And Ed, we've talked a little bit about, we have the 3 different buckets, that third one being the R&D bucket, where we've put some time and effort into looking, how do we build that out even further in the future? How do we add more value to not just running around the football field, which, Julie, when you said that, I kind of laughed, but when I think back to what I did in junior high and high school, we ran around the football field and that's all we did. And there's just so much more to physical education than being able to run around the football field.
Well, and part of it is learning teamwork. Part of it is learning the discipline. And I think it can be accomplished in so many different ways. And, it's not going to look the same for every kid, hopefully. But I think you're right, Chase. I think those practices that will sustain you through life are good to learn. And PE is more like, and actually, when you look at the academic standards state by state around physical education, very few of the academic standards are about activity. Most of the standards are things like Julie talked about, like learning what is a striated muscle versus another kind of muscle, and things like that. And so the physical activity is something that is easy to focus on in traditional schools. But it is one of those things that in the online setting, you can find ways to meet that in a multitude of ways. And even within a family, it could look different from kiddo to kiddo, what they want to do and how they learn how to play well with others and compete and be a good winner, be a good loser, as well as learn about muscle groups and hydration and, the food pyramid, which is really no longer a pyramid, I guess, right? So things like that.
So a bit about our audience, currently anyway, it's corporate related. and usually very large companies, employees of, and we have several VP level HR, comp and ben, recruitment, talent recruitment, acquisition. Some CEOs. We've got, I belong to a LinkedIn group which is full of CEOs, and there's around 30,000 of those. But we send them the shows, but whether or not they open it is another story. So it's all about the topic line and very specific elements that I could pump out in the PR addressed to specific target audience. We have on LinkedIn, I live on LinkedIn, just to give you an idea. We're members of and have access to 94 groups. That's about 1 million reach, give or take a few. But most of them never open stuff, I'm sure, but many do. So some of the other groups are lobbyists, government lobbyists. There's 20,000 of those. Most of them are Washington. But then we have, as I mentioned, HR is our predominant reach into the corporations, global 1,000 companies. And it's VP HR. We've got everybody, every one of them. And then some direct reports down the food chain. And then within comp and ben, that's a different aspect of HR, but it's all about people and money, and that leads to tax and legal. So CFO and of course CEOs to some extent. But it's other than some very specific CEO targets, we focus in on the actual center of influence, which is in HR, people management. So with that in mind, the age bracket, generally speaking, of our audience is Chase, Julie, I guess, your age brackets, young families for the most part, some teenagers. The very few my age or very few Gen Z that I know of anyway so far. So that's the wheelhouse, okay? And that is your market for the future, that's for sure. Huge, it's a huge population. And so I'd like you to address for a moment, very, very specifically, these people who are educated, and they're trying to get their kids educated. People who are from disadvantaged places or homes, they're not watching this. Okay, so it's all people who are generally intelligent, and want to do more for their kids whenever they can, and they're stuck because they're have the interpersonal relations, and then the kid relations, and then the kids and kids, and it's crazy. So and everybody's in the same bullpen, if you will, at home, and so it's really a tough time now for a lot of people, and for other people, it's wonderful. So I'm done, but I just wanted to share who our very specific audience is for this.
So Ed, I think there's a couple of different things, peeling this apart and how this can apply to that broader audience that you were just describing. So when we're looking at education for our students, yes, it's important. We've historically talked on your show about the importance of having a good education for your employees that are moving abroad to different locations. That's always important. But I think another thing that's really important for those executive levels, the HR folks, is to get involved in the lobbying efforts in wherever your country is for education, because that's your next group of employees. And so I think it's very important for folks that are at the CEO level, at the HR level, to understand what's happening in education so that they can have those fruitful internships that are coming up, and that you can really understand and feel confident that the students that are graduating right now are going to have those workforce skills that are going to be needed in 5 years.
I agree. And that somebody is thinking about what those workforce skills look like in 5 years. We may not, I don't think we could have imagined last January how effective we would all become in Zoom, for instance. No one would have anticipated this, but yet we can pretty much figure out how to live life in Zoom now. And so I think it's going to be that younger generation who is unafraid and, isn't intimidated by technology, will try anything, who will start shaping what the workforce looks like in a few years, and actually getting the opportunity to work with them while they're learning and in those formative years will be exciting for people like us. And we'll be the ones trying to play catch up with them, which is a good place to be in as well. But that's why I think there is something really exciting about the conversations that are starting to happen between industry, post-secondary, and in high school, particularly, to make sure that kids are becoming equipped. They're not all going to go into post-secondary. Some of them go right into the workforce. But I think those conversations are exciting. I think, the actual kids in high school who are earning certificates, they're taking dual credit courses in college. So if they're college bound or if they're workforce bound, they are actually getting introduced to those things in high school now in a meaningful way. It's not like, when we were kids and you took a skills inventory test in like 11th grade or something, and it said, you're going to be a nurse and you're going to be a teacher. It's not like that anymore. It's so much more refined. And a lot of those things can be delivered online, and more of them are going to be delivered online because of the pandemic. That is some of the stuff that they have had to figure out. Like, how do you teach kids how to get into a simulator to learn how to drive a backhoe rather than going and practicing on a backhoe?
Okay, Chase, how are you integrating the iCode schools with artificial intelligence and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, it's such an important part of enriching that student's education and getting, like Mary said, getting them access to these things. Some of the kids come in and they absolutely love it, and they get their hands on a drone and they're piloting this drone around the room, and we've got a whole skill set up, and they've got to go up and over this barrier and then come down and land on the target. Some kids love that. Some kids would enroll and they'd say, well, coding is not for me, but they're getting that experience before they spend 4 years in a college paying for that experience to realize, oh, I don't like that so much. And so what Mary's saying is just so important, that we get kids experience and opportunities in, I don't want to say lower stakes, but where they're not forking out an arm and a leg and going into debt for the next 15 years of their life to realize they do or do not like that. With Verano, kind of going back to your original question and then bringing it in to answer this question, we love finding companies and entities and schools all around the world where we can partner with them and create these opportunities for their local students to get access to a great curriculum, get access to great teachers, get access to partnerships such as an iCode, but we've put that next to our Arizona campus, where the students enrolled in the school get access to coding, whether that's, coding like a drone. There's these little things called Lego We-Dos. When I was a kid, Legos were just blocks. Now it's a block with a computer built in, and you can make it do all kinds of cool stuff. But then building out websites, and if a student were to go through our program with iCode for the entire time and work their way through, they will be fluent in 7 different coding languages, and they will understand not just the language, but the syntax behind it that will translate. Because let's be honest, a decade from now, there's going to be 8, 9, 10, 11 different coding languages. But if they can understand the syntax or the foundation of that, it's going to be really easy to go pick it up. A person who can play the piano, they can go pick up a guitar and a trumpet, and they've got that foundation in place already. So it's a lot easier to pick up the new instruments in that instance or new coding languages in this.
Well, we have less than 5 minutes available. Julie, how would you like to address what we've been talking about and get people to contact?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that it's so important, no matter what area you're in. We talked a little bit about this, but be involved in education, whether you have students that are grade school, high school, or they're adults. Know what's happening in your local government and be involved. You can be an advocate because these students who are graduating are going to be a part of our society, and we can help form what they're going to have access to. So if you're seeing things that you're upset with and you're not happy, there are options out there, and there's ways that you can get involved and lobby and really get involved in and really push and be advocates for your students.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Mary?
I think it's important to think that these kids are also going to be part of the economy. And so if I'm an employer, if I'm a CEO, I should be interested in getting involved in education and be part of the change. The change is happening. And as an employer, I would want to be part of the change because I want a workforce that's going to work for me. And right now, I think that's all being defined. And so I love the idea of the fact that we're thinking about what the next economy looks like, and we're able to actually engage the people who are going to be part of that economy, the people are going to be fueling that economy. And so I get excited when we think about what this means from a workforce perspective. What skills are they going to have when we employ them? And it is changing. It is changing very rapidly. And it is the time to actually get involved and be part of the change rather than waiting until it happens to us. And as employers, you should want to be part of that.
Well, so Chase, what we're seeing with implosions and this and that, business leaders are stepping up and speaking out in many, many different ways. So from a Verano point of view, you have a platform here and of course anywhere else you go, but what say you?
I think and it's so vitally important that whether we're Verano or one of these, global mobility HR CEOs, whoever it might be, that we understand that the future of the world is in our palm, and we should be doing everything that we can to support these students, and to kind of pull at the heartstrings of some of those HR professionals and multinational corporation people who may be watching, understanding what has happened over the last year. Your employees who last year would have gone all around the world and jumped into these places with these huge benefits packages, they've kind of dried up some of those benefits. First and foremost was the education allocation. It's gone across the board. I mean, everyone we've been talking to, Julie, has said, education, we're not paying for that anymore. And so from a business perspective, understand that just because that went away doesn't mean that the people you want moving to these locations just stopped having kids. They've still got kids and they still want a good quality education. And whether that's through the bridge school, which is financially affordable, it's not going to cost an arm and a leg like some of those huge, beautiful old school buildings all around the world. But additionally, talk with us at Verano. You want to build something unique to your local company, and we've had some conversations. And we're happy to build something out that meets the needs of your specific families. But I think that we can't just ignore the future generation. We've got to come together and find solutions that build out unique opportunities for these kids and make sure that they're equipped and prepared for the future.
So I look forward to welcoming you guys back during March, Thursdays, 9 a.m. California time. And let's discuss the topics and lay it out.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks so much, Ed. We really appreciate being with you today.
Thanks, Ed.
I've learned a lot, not only today, but for the past 8 or 9 months. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in the meeting room at Global TV Talk Show.
Have a wonderful day, and stay safe.